A local breast cancer survivor discovered her cancer because of her dad's battle with pancreatic cancer.
At the age of 32, she got her diagnosis and began her own journey with cancer. She's used her fight against breast cancer to fuel her purpose. Take a look. Today we're honoring breast cancer survivor Lindsay Valamek. Lindsay, glad to have you here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Okay, so you made the drive from Peoria, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Central Illinois native it sounds like. Let's dive right into your story here. Tell me where and when your breast cancer journey started.
So I'm a little bit unusual when it comes to my breast cancer story because it started with my dad getting diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, actually. There had been a fair amount of cancer in my family already, but he was diagnosed in 2013 with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Wow.
And if you know anything about pancreatic cancer, the survival rate's pretty low. So unfortunately, we only had about 8 months with him before he passed. But it was after his diagnosis that my OBGYN looked at my family history and said, wow, you've got a little pattern going on here. Have you ever thought about getting genetic testing done? So after the birth of my second daughter, I went ahead and had it done, and that's when I found out that I carry a BRCA2 mutation. And what that means is I have an elevated risk for developing breast cancer. So after I found that out, I met with a surgeon, and I was going to take a preventative approach and have surgery to remove my breasts in order to potentially prevent breast cancer from happening. But that summer when I had my first mammogram at 32, they found my cancer.
Wow, at 32. So without your dad's situation, you may not have thought to even check on things.
Absolutely. So breast cancer screening, you can get a baseline mammogram starting at age 35. For most insurance plans will cover it. And then routine screening typically doesn't happen until age 40. And at the time, I hadn't felt the lump in my breast, so I had no idea it was even there. So without knowing my risk, I never would have had that mammogram and found it when I did.
Wow. So what did it look like from there, from the diagnosis? How does it flip life on its head? What does it look like?
Well, like I said, losing my dad to cancer was still very fresh in my memory. So even though I knew I had this risk, and once I heard the news, it didn't come as a huge shock, I still was terrified that it was going to end my life. I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. My husband and I had only been married about 5 years. Our life was just beginning and getting started. And so I was terrified that now everything had changed. So luckily I already had a care team in place because I was planning on doing the preventative surgery. So I got back in with my team right away. They recommend I start with chemotherapy first because of the type of cancer I had. So I did 5 months of chemotherapy. And then finished my treatment plan with surgery in January of 2016.
Wow. So what does the day-to-day look like with like chemotherapy?
It's challenging. I chose to continue to try to work through that. I'm a registered nurse. At the time, I was the manager of labor and delivery at Methodist in Peoria. But it was important for me to try to keep as much of my normal routine as I could. Plus, I'm a go, go, go kind of person, so just sitting around and feeling sick really wasn't something that I wanted to indulge in. So I was able to work part-time and still go to treatments, but there were definitely times when I needed to phone in friends and family to help, especially with young ones at home. Yeah,
what was the toughest part of that diagnosis? I'd imagine, of course, the fear is going to set in, but in terms of like your family, your kids, what was the hardest part for you?
I think it was trying to maintain a positive attitude through all of it and then actually allowing myself to rest. I think as women, we're very productivity minded, we're heads of household, we're trying to take care of everyone else. And to actually sit back and say, okay, now it's time for other people to take care of me was a really hard thing for me to do. And I kept trying to push myself to be the normal Lindsay that everybody knew. And towards the end of my treatment, I was just completely run into the ground to the point where my oncologist was like, you need to rest.
What impact has that diagnosis had on your life now, being past the chemotherapy, being past kind of all the treatments of it? What impact has that had on you now?
There's so many different directions my life took after this diagnosis. For one, it was my wake-up call that I was spending a lot of time in the hospital with my work family and not as much time with my home family. And anytime you have a sense of your own mortality, you kind of sit back and say, what's really important to me in my life? And while I loved my job and my career, I realized I wanted to build in space to be home with my family more. So I actually switched jobs at that point to become a breast cancer navigator, which allowed me to have more office type hours, but also to work with the breast cancer community, because I felt a strong calling after my experience to be able to walk alongside other women to show them like there is life on the other side of this. Because being somebody that's been through chemo, that's been through surgery, I was able to relate to them in a different way than I think other medical professionals in that space can.
Well, pretty amazing story. The full interview and podcast will be available on our website, CILiving.tv.